Okay, so Aulopiformes are a group of fish. They're an order of about 230, so it's quite a big group. And they're very interesting because they have both an extant record and an extinct record. And the extinct record is very good. So we have fossils from both the English chalk, which is in the Cretaceous, and the London clay, which is in the Paleogene. And we can use these deposits to look at the relationships of this group over quite a long period of time. So in the modern, this group's also quite interesting and is looked at by biologists because it has a very wide range of form and function. So the top, the one with big teeth, is an Aulopisauroid, Aulopisaurus ferox, and it lives very, very deep. So we're talking a kilometre or so. And then on the other side at the top is Cynodus, which is a shallow water dwelling Aulopiform. And then there's also some very interesting adaptions. So this is Ipnops at the bottom, and it has a photoreceptive plate instead of eyes on the top of its head. So it has hugely expanded frontals to support this. And then there's some other odd things in this group. So that's a tripod fish, and it stands on the base of the sediment using extensions on its fins. And they're very interesting. You can look at videos of them on YouTube. And if they get scared, they just retract their fins and swim off. So they're partially flexible, but they're strong enough to support them. So my fossils come from two localities. They're both English localities, except for one, which is from Maastrichtian in the Netherlands. The majority come from the English chalk. And these fossils all tend to be skulls, but they're all three-dimensional. And so we can look at how bones articulate, and you get different information for the information you can get from 2D fossils. A lot of these fossils tend to be just skulls. There's a few exceptions, so the one in the middle has almost an entire body, although it's missing part of just the last little bit of the tail. Similarly, the London clay fossils are also skulls, but these are found in nodules, and so you rarely get more than the skull, because obviously a skull is nice and round. So both of these data sets lend themselves well to the vogue in paleontology at the moment, which is CT scanning. But I will come on to that in a moment. So both of these sets of fossils have been studied by various people over the years. The last big study of the English chalkfish was by Woodward in the early 1900s. He did look at the London clay fossils, but only in the catalogue of fossil fishes that he did for the British Museum. So they weren't properly studied until Cassier in 1966 in his Fauna du Ichthyology, I can't say it, of the London clay. No one's really looked at these using modern techniques. So whilst you have very good detail of the outside of these fossils, we don't really know what's inside. And for Aulopiformes, some of the most important and informative characteristics are in the gill skeleton, which you can't see without looking inside, either by grinding, which you lose the fossil, and some of this fossil up here, there's only one of it, or by CT scanning now. So I CT scanned 12 fossils at the NHM in London. They were of varying quality, and it depends on the type of rock that they're enclosed in as to how well they scan. So on the left-hand side, as you look at it, is a London clay fossil. And these tend to come out with a very variable scan quality. So if they've been preserved in pyrite, which a lot of them have, you have really bright, the white bright stuff is pyrite preserved. There's also some really wispy things. So like here, that's actually the parasphenoid. So if you can get this out, you get a lot of anatomical detail. The English chalk ones tend to be easier to get information out of. So fossils I scanned, they come from several localities. So these tend to be Sussex Kent English chalk fossils. And then there's the one Maastrichtian fossil. And the rest are from the Eupresian and the London clay. They're Sheppey fossils. So these are quite interesting. So the Sheppey fossils, you can still go and collect fossils from Sheppey. But the English chalk fossils, we're not going to really get any more because a lot of them were found when they were mining by hand, and now mining is no longer by hand, a lot of the fossils aren't found. So CT scanning allows us to get detail out of fossils that we wouldn't normally get. And it allows us to look inside fossils. So for Aulopiformes, there's an extant data set which has morphological characteristics. And there's 136 characteristics, and of those, 66 are cranial characteristics, so characters that you could see in fossils. And the others are either soft body characteristics or ontogenic characteristics. So of those 66 cranial characteristics, and Sardinoides is a bit of an exception because you can get characteristics from the rest of the body as well. Of those 66 characteristics, about a sixth of them you can see without CT scanning. So you're looking at like 8 to 10 characteristics. And then with some of the really good fossils, when you can get gill skeletons out of the fossils, you're then looking at taking that up to about half. So you can get about 30, 35 characters out of these. And in some cases, you can get much more. So the gill skeleton is also really important because it has one of the characters that defines this group. So for Sardinoides, this was particularly interesting because this fossil has been assigned to a different group and has been used as calibrations in a different group. And this fossil is definitely an Aulopiform. So this particular fossil needs reassigning to the Aulopiformes. But it also means that this fossil, which is an English chalk fossil, gives quite a lot of information about the habitat changes across the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. So as well as doing morphological analysis on all of the fossils, and I coded them up and put them into my data set, I had extant molecular data for, I think it was about 88 extant fish. And so I did a tip dating analysis, which has been developed in the past few years, and it's being investigated. So it has some issues. So I wanted to test whether the model that you used for the root prior affected the phylogeny that you recovered. So when you do a tip dating analysis, you have to put in so your known ages, so those are obviously 0 because you know that the extant fish are alive today. For your fossils, you should know like a time bin that the fossil will be in, so the stratigraphic range. So you plot that in. And then you have to define something else in the phylogeny for it to estimate rates of evolution. And so you estimate the root prior. So there's a number of different ways that you could estimate a root prior. So you could say that it would fall in a time range of any time from the oldest known fossil of the group to before like the end of the fossil record. But obviously that's giving equal probability to all of time. And it's very unlikely that something that was last seen in the Cretaceous was actually originating in the Devonian. So there's other models, and partly the model depends on where you get your data from. So for the normal distribution, that tends to be if you're using a molecular clock calibration. And the exponential is particularly good if you're doing a paleontological estimate, because the likelihood of the group originating gets less and less further away from your last known fossil. So I did this with a number of different things, and actually it gives some really interesting results. And so the root prior really affects both the tree that you get out and the age of divergences that you estimate. So the normal distribution gives a really old age, and your paleontological estimate, which uses an exponential distribution and the fossil record, is much younger. And these sort of cluster here with the uniform. So the actual age is probably somewhere up here, but obviously it's really hard to say. So one of the other things that came out of doing a number of different analyses was that this group of fish, which all look big and teethy and scary, sort of jump around in the tree depending on what inputs you put in. So on this side, this is with a normal distribution, which pushes the age, obviously, far back in time. And this is with the exponential distribution, where your age is constrained to quite close to where the last known fossil is. And this group always clump together, but switch around in the tree. And with a normal distribution, I think it's likely that because the age is further back in time, it allows more time for these derived characteristics that we see in the Aulopiformes up here to develop. Whereas in the exponential distribution, there simply isn't time. So they have to develop these characteristics twice, which is less parsimonious. So if we found a fossil that was further back in the fossil record that was part of this group, then I think it's more likely that they would fall out with the normal distribution, and that is more likely to be what would happen in the future. So just picking up on this habitat shift, this is one of the trees. This is the normal distribution tree. So the encodontids are falling out up here. And this is Sardinoides, which is the interesting fossil that I was talking about earlier. So what's interesting about this fossil is that it sits at the base of these other London clay fossils. And the London clay fossils are shallow water. And they look very similar, and they cluster in a group of modern things that live in shallow water. So the light blue is shallow water, the dark blue is deep water. And so this means that there had to be some survival of a shallow water dwelling creature across the KPG boundary, whereas these big toothy scary predatory things go extinct and aren't seen after the KPG in shallow water. They move into the deep sea. So Sardinoides is a very interesting and useful fossil. So then this sort of just leads on to what I'm doing now as my PhD project. So these encodontids go extinct at the KPG, and they seem to be replaced in the Cenozoic by other fish, and particularly tunas and mackerels and their kin. And these are also predatory and seem to fill the same niche. So I'm now looking into that and whether there was changes in rates of evolution and replacement across the KPG. So just to conclude, that tip dating analysis particularly is massively affected by the root prior and definitely needs a lot of work before we trust it completely. But it holds some benefits over normal dating analysis. So my thanks and my references. And any questions?